Good morning. Please open up your Bibles to the Gospel of John in the New Testament, John chapter 7. After about 20 years outside of school, outside of any sort of formal education, I've decided recently to seek graduate certification at an online brotherhood seminary in the subject of Christian apologetics. And so for the past 6 weeks or so, once a week, I am taking an online course one evening a week on apologetics. And this last week, one of the things we were talking about in the class was addressing the problem of evil and suffering in the world. If God exists and if he is all-loving and all-powerful, then why is there evil in the world? Why is there suffering in the world? And that is a whole different topic. That's a whole series of lessons in and of itself. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because one of the things that was brought out in the class this last week was that when Jesus was here on earth, even Jesus went through suffering. And of course, when we think of Jesus suffering, we think obviously of the cross. We think of perhaps his statement that foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. We think of the people who tried to kill him, his unpopularity. But one of the things that was brought out in the class, and it's something that maybe we as Christians might not focus as much about, and that is that one thing that Jesus went through that brought him lots of pain, lots of grief, was that even his own family did not believe in him. Now, that might seem as a surprise to some of you because you think of his adopted father and his mother, Joseph and Mary, and obviously when you look at what the scriptures say about them, it's very clear that they believed in him. I mean, before he was even born, angels had spoken to both of them about him and what he would do. But I'm not necessarily talking about Joseph and Mary. Believe it or not, there are hints in the New Testament accounts of Jesus' life that there were times when Mary's faith in him might not have been as strong as it should have been. But I'm not even talking about Mary. What I'd like for us to look at, starting in John 7 tonight, is that Jesus' siblings, his brothers, did not believe in him. Now let's read the first 9 verses. John 7, verses 1 through 9. It says, "After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of booths was at hand. So his brothers said to him, 'Leave here and go to Judea, so that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world.' Now notice verse 5. For not even his brothers believed in him. Jesus said to them, 'My time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it, that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I am not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come.' After saying this, he remained in Galilee." So here we read that when Jesus was alive and during his ministry on earth, even his own brothers didn't believe in him. Now, Matthew chapter 13, verse 55 gives the names of his brothers: James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. They did not believe in him. Now think about it. They grew up with him, and they are very much aware of his teaching. His own mother witnessed the very first miracle that he did, turning water into wine. It's not said that whether they were present in Cana when he turned water into wine. They might have been. They might have seen it. If not, their mother surely told them about it. They might have seen some of his miracles. They definitely heard about his miracles, but they still did not believe in him. They still were not on his side. Have you ever had family members not be on your side? Have you ever had family members not believe in you, not support you? You expect opposition, you expect criticism, you expect disappointment from other people, but not from your family, right? So when it comes from your family, it hurts even more, and that's what Jesus had to deal with. This is something that was prophesied about Jesus in the Old Testament. In Psalm 69, verse 8, prophecy about the Messiah. The psalmist said, I have become a stranger to my brothers, an alien to my mother's sons. It's talking about Jesus there. In fact, in the Gospel of Mark, if you go to Mark chapter 3 and you look at verse 21, Mark says that his family were saying about him, he is out of his mind. Now think about that. Not only did his brothers not believe in him, but his brothers were telling people he's crazy. He's crazy. He's out of his mind. You see, you would think that out of everyone, Jesus' own family would have believed in him from the very beginning, because after all, they knew him better than anyone else. Why did his brothers not believe in him? There are several possibilities. Maybe they had the wrong preconception about him. You know, that was a problem that Jesus did have to deal with. John chapter 6, verse 15, there was on one occasion where he saw that the Jews were going to force him to become king. See, that's the mistaken idea that the Jews had about their Messiah, that he would be a ruler like David was, that he would conquer the Romans and end Roman tyranny. That's what they thought the Messiah would do. It's very likely that that's what his brothers thought the Messiah would do too. Again, John chapter 7, look again at verses 2 through 4. What were they telling him? You need to go over to the feast in Judea because your disciples need to see the work that you're doing. You don't need to be working in secret. You need to be working openly. Why would they be saying that? Hey, if you're calling yourself Messiah, you're not gonna get the following that you need to kick Rome out of here unless more people can see what you're doing. There's a big feast down there in Jerusalem happening right now. You need to be there. You need to show everyone what it is that you say you can do if you're the Messiah. Maybe they had the wrong preconceptions about him. And he wasn't living up to their preconceptions. He was not living up to the Jews' preconceptions. And when someone does not live up to the expectations that you have for them, it is so easy for you to reject them. So, question for us today. Do we let preconceived notions keep us from clearly seeing the truth and accepting the truth? Think about the beliefs that you have held in your heart, whether it be religious beliefs, whether it be your worldview about anything. Think about the beliefs that you've held for so long. Have you ever thought to re-examine them? Has someone ever said, you know what, you ought to think about this again. You ought to reconsider. And when someone tells you that, has your automatic reaction been, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because this is what I believe. I know this to be true. Have you ever rejected a viewpoint that's completely new? You've never heard it before? You never thought about it before? And so that's why you're rejecting it, just because you never thought about it before? We can have preconceptions that keep us from hearing the truth and accepting the truth. Here's the thing about truth. You want to find the truth, if you want to believe the truth, if you want to follow the truth, it's never going to happen unless you have a willingness to hear it. And you're not going to have a willingness to hear it if you're blinded by your own biases, if you're blinded by your own preconceptions. Truth has nothing to fear from investigation. Remember who God called more noble-minded in the Bible? Acts 17, verse 11. The people in that village of Berea, he said they were more noble-minded than the people over in Thessalonica. Why? Because two reasons. They accepted the word, they heard the word eagerly, and they examined the scriptures daily to see if what was being taught to them was the truth. They were willing to investigate it. They were willing to consider it. They were willing to think it out. That's what we need to do as well. So why did his brothers not believe in him? Maybe they had the wrong preconception about him. But there might be another possibility. Maybe they were jealous of him. You ever thought about that? I mean, look at him. Jesus is popular, famous, large crowds followed him everywhere. Matthew chapter 12, verse 46, you read on one occasion that his family, including his brothers, were wanting to speak with him, and they couldn't get in to hear him because of all the crowds. Someone had to go in and tell him, hey, your mother and your brothers and your sisters are outside. They're wanting to speak with you. Now, where was his family from? They were from Podunk, Nazareth, in backwater Galilee. No one knew them. They weren't famous. They didn't have mass quantities of people following them everywhere they went. And think about this too. Jesus was the child in their family that came into this world under suspicious circumstances. Because Mary got pregnant with him before her marriage with Joseph was finalized. The rest of the kids came about after the marriage was finalized. So Jesus, and it's implied in John, and it's also prophesied in Psalms, that Jesus was looked at by many in that society as an illegitimate child. Maybe his brothers were very much aware of that. Well, you know, he's probably not even our real brother. You know? Mom got pregnant with him before her and Dad ever got together. Maybe that's the way they looked at it. But now the illegitimate child is who everyone's talking about. And no one knows who they are. So maybe they were jealous of him. Maybe that's why they didn't believe him. See, jealousy, here's what jealousy does. Jealousy keeps us from seeing things clearly. Ask yourself this. Consider yourself. Examine yourself. Do you let envy get in the way of truth? You ever been jealous that you may be wrong and someone else may be right? Have you ever thought, you know what, if I admit that he's right or that she's right, then that will somehow make them better than me? I don't want them to be better than me, so no, I'm not going to admit that I'm wrong. No, not going to happen. Remember this about truth. You can't be saved without truth. You can't be saved without truth. Truth is what leads you to salvation. And truth and salvation are too precious. They're too valuable to let jealousy and envy keep us from it. Always remember that. So maybe they were jealous of their brother. Another possibility of why they did not believe in him. Maybe they were blinded by familiarity. They were blinded by familiarity. Now, what do I mean by that? Go to the book of Matthew, chapter 13. Let's start reading at verse 54. Matthew 13, starting with verse 54. Now, this is when Jesus came back to his hometown of Nazareth. And it says, and coming to his hometown, he taught them in their synagogues so that they were astonished. And said, where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Now notice the next verse, verse 55. Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And are not all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things? And they took offense at him. Now notice what Jesus said to them. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and in his own household. And he did not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief. You know, have you ever heard this saying, familiarity, it breeds, what, you remember? It breeds contempt. When you get married, the wedding day, the honeymoon, it's all new, and you're just so much in love. She can do no wrong. He can do no wrong. You're just so happy. And then what's another statement that we say a lot? The honeymoon is over. And what happens when the honeymoon's over? That familiarity sits in. I wish that they would just keep the bathroom door closed. Why? Why have it open? That doesn't happen in my house. What about kids? When they're teenagers. Now, when they're young, parents, you know, they adore you. When they get teenagers, what happens? Overnight. There's like a switch that's flipped, you know? Parent, you don't know what you're talking about. I am so much wiser than you. You know? I've been living with you for 13 years. It's time I'm out on my own. I'm tired of this. I want to see something new. What about you, parents? I'm not going to let you get off the hook either. When your kids get older than teenagers, when they grow up and they're on their own, and they do get that wisdom and experience that comes with life, and maybe now, parents, you might be in your 50s, 60s, 70s. Maybe your kids, now they're in their 30s, 40s, they'll come to you and they might say, hey, Mom and Dad, you really ought to think about this. You might not be making the best decision here. Maybe you ought to think about doing this instead. And what's your knee-jerk reaction, parents? I changed your diapers. You don't get to give me advice. No, Well, it's good advice. No, I don't care. I'm not going to listen to it because I changed your diapers. I know and you don't. You don't get to tell me anything. Familiarity breeds contempt. That's what happened with Jesus. He goes to Nazareth. Forget about the miracles. Forget about the teaching. Hey, we watched this kid grow up. We're not going to listen to him. And what did he say? A prophet has honor everywhere except where? Where he grew up and among his own family members. Familiarity breeds contempt. Question: do we let familiarity blind us to the truth? Again, marriage, it starts out, yeah, honey, I'll be happy to consider what you're saying. I love you so much. Fast forward a few years. I'm not going to listen to her. I'm not going to listen to him. I will give honest consideration to anyone and everyone except my spouse, or except my parents, or except my grown-up kids. Familiarity breeds contempt. Do we reject what a relative tells us or a close friend tells us? And do we do it especially if we are so familiar with them that we are very much aware of their own faults? Hey, who are you to tell me that I'm wrong? Because you do this. You ever done that? Because I haven't. But have you all? I'm not even looking over here right now. That's the thing. One thing you need to remember about truth. Truth can still be communicated by messengers who aren't perfect themselves. In Philippians chapter 1, Paul was talking in verses 15 through 18, he was talking about how there were some who were preaching the gospel, the truth, but they were preaching it for the wrong reasons. They were preaching it out of envy. They were preaching it out of spite. And he said, you know what? They shouldn't be preaching it out of envy or spite. But you know what I'm glad of? At least they're preaching the truth. They might be doing it for the wrong reasons, but at least they're doing it. So I'm happy that the truth's getting out there. That's a good mindset to have. Truth can still be communicated by people who aren't perfect themselves. Don't underestimate the impact that familiarity or jealousy or preconceptions can have with your spiritual walk with God. And any one of these mistakes were why Jesus' own family gave him problems and didn't follow him, even to the point where he could do a miracle and it didn't convince them. Now, here's the thing, and the last point I want to make in the lesson is that you want to know why I'm a Christian? You want to know why I believe in Jesus of Nazareth, that he is the Son of God? There are many reasons, but one of the big reasons is because he had issues with his family. That's why I believe in him, because he had issues with his family. Many of you are looking at me like, what in the world are you talking about? I want you to think about this. The Bible brings out that eventually his brothers did believe in him. He ascends into heaven in Acts chapter 1. After he ascends into heaven, look at verse 14 of Acts 1. That verse lists his brothers right alongside of his mother and the rest of his disciples worshiping him. Acts chapter 12, Acts chapter 15, Acts chapter 21, Galatians chapter 2. You read of his brother James. James becomes a leader in the church in Jerusalem. New Testament books, James and Jude. You know who they were written by? His brothers. His brother James, his brother Judas wrote two of the books in the New Testament. And according to secular history, James would be thrown off the ledge of the temple and killed because he followed his brother. And Jude would be martyred in Syria because he was a Christian. His brothers didn't believe in him. Then they came to believe in him to the point where they were willing to die for him. So what changed? From all accounts in the Bible, here's what changed them from unbelievers to believers: the resurrection of Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 7, Paul says that shortly after he was raised from the dead, Jesus appeared to his brother James. Now, that's all that's said. But think about this. We know that James knew that his brother had been crucified because the entire family would have been in Jerusalem to observe the Passover. And it doesn't say in the Bible that his brothers were there at the cross when he died, probably because they were ashamed of him. Again, they didn't believe in him, and he's dying a criminal's death. They were probably ashamed of him. But his mother was there. We know that. His mother was there, and so his mother would have told the rest of her family, "Your brother's dead. I saw him die." And then just days later, you have James walking along, minding his own business, and then suddenly there's his dead brother right in front of him with the holes still in his hands and in his feet. And he's talking to him. And James sees this with his own eyes. And it's not just James, likely the rest of his brothers probably saw him too. It says in verse 6 of 1 Corinthians 15 that he appeared to over 500 people in one gathering. So maybe his brothers were among those 500 people. But I want you to put yourself in James' shoes. You don't believe in your brother. You hear about the miracles. You might even see his miracles, but you think he's faked them. You don't believe in him. You think for one reason or another he's a charlatan. He's a con man. But you can't fake dying and then coming back from the dead. Not when you have been publicly executed by the Roman government. You can't fake that. But James sees him with his own eyes. You see, that's what the resurrection did for Jesus' family. It shattered any of these blinders that we've talked about this morning. These blinders that they might have had. You want to know why I'm a believer in Jesus Christ? I mean, come on, think about this. I'm going to talk like a skeptic for a second. A virgin gives birth to him? Really? He's supposed to be the Son of God? He supposedly walks on water, feeds thousands of people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He makes blind people see. He raised the dead. He heals the sick. He makes paralyzed people walk. He himself is raised from the dead. Do you really expect me to believe that? Yeah. And yes, I do believe it. I believe in him, and one big reason is because of his family, because they didn't believe in him. For whatever reason, they did not believe in him, but then they did. Luke wrote in Acts 1 verse 3 that Jesus presented himself alive after his suffering, quote, by many convincing proofs. By many convincing proofs. His family members were persuaded by these convincing proofs, the overwhelming empirical evidence. These same family members, remember Mark 3:21, they were saying he's out of his mind, he's crazy. These same family members who thought he was crazy, now they're going out and they're telling everyone they know that he is Lord and he is Savior. And then they're arrested. And they're beaten and they're even killed for saying all this. And it didn't stop them. They didn't recant it. They didn't retract it. Even when their life was on the line, they were still his followers no matter what. Orthodox Jewish scholar Pinchas Lapid, former chairman of the Applied Linguistics Department of Israel's Bar Ilan University, said this to Time magazine back in 1979. If the disciples were totally disappointed and on the verge of desperate flight because of the very real reason of the crucifixion, it took another very real reason in order to transform them from a band of disheartened and dejected Jews into the most self-confident missionary society in world history. He's right. You want to know what that reason was? The resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's why his unbelieving family members became his disciples, and it is why you and I must follow him as well. He was more than just what Islam says about him, a good man with flaws. He's more than what Don Lemon on CNN said about him last week. He's not a perfect man. He's more than just what Judaism says about him. He was a prophet, but that's it. No, all of them are mistaken about him. He was more than just a prophet. He was more than just a good man, and he was a perfect man. And we know this because he came back from the dead, which is exactly what was prophesied about the Messiah. He came back from the dead. And so he is Lord. He is Savior. He is sitting at God's right hand right now, and you and I must follow him. We must. And I hope that everyone in this room seeks him and his will first and foremost in our lives. If you are here this morning and you would like to become his follower, if you do believe in him, as you should, make the decision to live for him, turn away from the sin in your life, and wash your sins away in baptism. And when you come up out of that water, he will forgive you. You will be cleansed, you will be saved, and you will be a Christian, his follower. If you have that need, please come now while we stand and sing.